Has anybody ever flown in a small plane? In real life? Are you living a fantasy life or has no one here has flown in a small plane? Osvaldo? Okay. During the lecture, I'm going to have you try to imagine, and you'll see this on the X-plane when we go into the X-plane again. Try to imagine what it's like to be in both a low-wing airplane and a high-wing airplane while you are doing maneuvers. You can actually see that on X-plane. If you're flying along looking out the front window and you're going to make a turn to the left, the first thing you want to do is make sure there's no other aircraft to your left. Am I correct? But if you're in a high-wing airplane, what happens? Pardon? Somebody answered it. What? Right, you can't see. The wing comes down and it blocks your view of the turn. So one of the things I'm going to cover today is not only the design of the landing gear, which is really important, but also the design of the airplane itself and the comparison between high wing and low wing. High wing are not all bad. In fact, I have a whole list in my lecture of all the benefits of having a high wing airplane. I also have the benefits of a low wing airplane. And as I'm going to point out, there are people who prefer one or the other for various reasons. So I notice also that the last one or two quizzes, it seems like you're easing up a little bit, like your scores aren't quite as good or you sort of miss things. Now, not necessarily today, the quiz that you did today, but just in general, it seems maybe you're slacking off a little bit, maybe you have too much work, maybe you're worried about your essay. Don't forget the essay is going to be 5 paragraphs, double-spaced, generally Times Roman or Arial if you have a computer, which you should. If you don't want to do it on paper and you'd rather email it to me, that's okay. I'll accept email, but it has to be in the same format that it would be if it's going to be paper, because more than likely, when I get it, I'll print it out here at the college, and I'll grade it that way. 5 paragraphs, an introductory paragraph, and then paragraphs that talk about major points in your essay, and then the last thing you put in there is the bibliography. Don't tell me that you have cited works if there's nothing in the text of your essay that says, in quotes, Gallagher / 2007. That's a citation. But that goes in the body. If you're not going to do that, if you're just going to try to use your own words, go ahead. But I can tell you that having read through some of them so far, it seems to me that you have taken information completely out of your reference and used it as though it was yours. Now, the way to get around that plagiarism is to put in there right after that where you got that reference from. And all you have to do is put the name of the author and the year. Then at the end, you can say work cited, and you can say the citation in full. Gallagher such and such, and the name of the article, and the publication in which it was issued, the year in which it was issued, the publisher, in that case if it was a book or a magazine article. So you want to make sure that if you are not going to put any citations in the text, then don't use the words that come right out of that citation. That's plagiarism. And remember I told you before, it's really easy to get around plagiarism. Tell me where you got that sentence from, because if it's a pretty complex sentence that is perfect grammatically and it contains a lot of technical information, I doubt that it came from your mind. I'm pretty sure it came from a book or a magazine article or a website. And that's okay. That's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. In fact, I just got done reading an article that was about 25,000 words long on environmental ethics. And all that author did was citation after citation. I finally got fed up reading it because in even one paragraph there was something like 10 citations. That's too much. But he got away with it. He published it. He's a PhD. He'll get credit for it at his college or university. And that's fine. But what he did was he said, well, none of the words or sentences in this paragraph are mine, so I'm going to tell you where I got each one of them. You can do the same thing. It's so easy to avoid plagiarism. Tell the reader what your thought was, what information you got that was important, and then tell the reader where it came from. Pretty easy to do. Then at the end, a list, either a bibliography or works cited, whichever. If you cited it in the paragraph, put works cited at the end. If you didn't do that, if you just referred in general to books and magazines, then just list them as a bibliography. That's the difference between a bibliography and a works cited. Works cited appears in the body. Bibliography, you just read through a lot of these articles. You might have looked at 10 books. You might have looked at 2 magazine articles. You might have accessed different different internet sites like we're going to do tomorrow. Remember, it's due a week from today, so probably what we're going to do tomorrow is spend time in the computer lab using the access to the internet to finish up and work hard on the details of your essay. I don't want you to turn in a bad essay. It's 30 points. 30% of your entire grade in this course is the essay. That's a big number. You know, all of these quizzes we've been taking, you know how much that represents of your final grade? 10%. 10% of your... So I have to take all the quizzes all the way together, right? All the questions, 10 each, 10, 10, 10, 10. Right now, it's up to 155 points for your quizzes. But that represents only about 7 points of the final 10 that you're going to get for your final grade. So it's important to spend much more time on your essay than it is on the grades. However, I noticed that even in the last 2 quizzes, a couple of people who did really poorly on their quizzes got dropped from a C to a D or from a B to a C. I would say most of the rest of you are not terribly affected by that difference because you're probably like in the middle of the B range or the middle of the A range or the middle of the C range. But there were a couple who were on marginal, and they got either transferred up from D to a C or from a C down to a D again. Are you guys done? Okay, come on forward. Take your seats. Turn in your quizzes. Anyway, spend more time on the quizzes, on the essay, than you have in the past because it's 3 times as important as all of the quizzes you're going to take in this course. And the other thing is class participation represents 10% of your final grade. Thank you. We have a mouse in the class? Thought I heard a mouse. Okay, while we're waiting for the other one to warm up, we can go look at this one. First thing we're going to examine are retractable and fixed gear systems. Fixed gear means that the wheels don't go anywhere. They just continue to hang down below the aircraft, whether it's in flight or on the ground. An example, Cessna 172. Pardon? Okay. Retractable and fixed gear. There are only two kinds of gears. All airlines have, all major commercial jets have retractable gear. There are some smaller airliners that have fixed gear. Cessna still makes a few of those, but the majority of the world's aircraft have retractable gear. Is that good enough? Okay, this is Cessna 172, and you can see that the three wheels are down and they're fixed and they're covered and they're not likely to retract. And normally the way you can tell retractable gear from non-retractable is that wheel coverings, the white covering over the top of the wheel, they will have taken off those wheel pants, they're called wheel pants. Look carefully enough, you probably see that. Still a fixed airplane. Of course, my airplane, I still fly it a lot. It's a Piper, and what we've just shown you are two of the themes for today. The one theme is gear, fixed gear, and the other theme now, you've seen two aircraft, one high wing, one low wing. And those, again, with some exceptions, there are certain aircraft that are called mid-wing aircraft. That is, the wing isn't exactly on the bottom and it's not exactly on the top. It's sort of halfway between. But 99% probably of all the light aircraft are either high wing or low wing. This is a Cessna 210. And there's one Cessna 210 model out here in the warehouse floor. It has retractable gear. It's a very good, fast airplane, high wing. So it's the combination of the two themes we're going to talk about today. That is high wing. It has a high wing and a retractable gear. One of the problems that Cessna has, and we'll talk about why in a little bit, is the fact that the gear system is very complicated. And it's complicated because in order to tuck the gear up, it's got to do several things. It's got to immediately disengage from the locks. Then it has to swing back and it stops momentarily. Then it has to twist. Then it has to resume its folding up. And then it finally, on this particular one, fortunately, it doesn't have gull doors, gear doors, which look like gull wings. As you'll see out here on the warehouse floor, the 210 sitting out there is an older style, and it has doors that have to open up first, and that's the most complicated gear system in the history of aviation. The older Cessna 210. This is a picture of the one out on the floor, and you can see these big, huge doors that have to come open in flight. The center doors have to come open. And all of that has to happen perfectly in timing. So when I used to sell against the Cessna 210, when I was a Piper dealer, I used to get the maintenance manual out, and if somebody came in and said, well, I'm kind of looking at a Cessna 210, and I'll say, okay, now here's the maintenance manual, and in the maintenance manual is about that thick, right? If you've seen them around here, you've seen the maintenance manual, they're pretty thick. Well, the Cessna manual alone has nearly a half or more inch of paper devoted strictly to the gear system. It's that complicated because so many different pressure points and so many different T's and elbows in the hydraulics of it have to be perfectly pressurized in order for it to work carefully. And I can tell you that having been down to Baja a number of times, maybe 100, and have flown down in older Cessnas and newer ones, 210s, one particular time we went down there in a Cessna whose number was 2275 Romeo, we had the same problem. We had a problem with the gear. The doors half open, the gear went half up, and then it wouldn't even cycle. We had to fly all the way back with the gear hanging down. So you can see a side view, and you can see these center doors again. So it has a whole complex system of doors, center doors, side doors, nose wheel doors, and they all have to operate perfectly. Now here's a Piper. The Piper has retractable gear, and it is significantly simpler than the Cessna gear. And as we go on in this lecture, I want you to begin thinking about why do you think that the Piper designers were able to come up with a much simpler gear system than the Cessna designers. There's a specific reason, and if you think about it carefully enough, let me know in a few minutes. Here's the gear being retracted underneath the Piper. You can see it just about to fold up underneath into this wheel well right here. That's been the Piper gear system for as long as they've had retractable gear airplanes. And you can see again how nice and smooth it is underneath. You can just barely see the gear. Let's take a look at this one. There it is. So there's no cover. The wheel fits so snugly that the penalty for what kind of drag? What kind? Parasite, right. The penalty for parasite drag is minimal because it fits so well. This door here, that closes up, but it just goes in like that. Really a beautiful, simple system. So, a summary of gear systems. Piper definitely has the best and the easiest to maintain gear system. And before we leave gears, I'm going to ask the question, why do you think it was easier for Piper to design it than Cessna? But we'll cover that in a minute. Cessna's gear system continues on and on and on to cause maintenance problems and maintenance expense. And even if there isn't a problem, you have to have it checked by an inspector authorization for checking to make sure that all the pressure points and all the electromechanical systems work perfectly to be able to allow the hydraulics to go through the system and do the work they're supposed to do by twisting and bending and relaxing and pushing and lifting up into the belly of the Cessna. Piper, on the other hand, when there's a fail-safe, when all else fails, when all electrical fails, when all your hydraulic fails, everything fails, gravity pulls the gear down and locks it. You cannot get much simpler than that. You cannot get any safer than that. It is just a very simple, easy system that allows all pilots to be able to handle any kind of situation where you lose electrical power or you lose hydraulic power or a combination of both of them, or both of them in fact, and not have to worry about whether or not you're going to land an aircraft with a retractable gear. This is a side note. Today, probably the largest manufacturer of pretty good high-speed composite aircraft is Cirrus, and they have strictly fixed gear. I think they've just come out with a one-up Cirrus jet that is retractable, but all of their four-place aircraft that are beautiful aircraft, fast, and they have an explosive parachute tucked into the back of the fuselage in case the pilot has trouble or loses control of the aircraft. He can pull a cord and it will explode right through the skin of the fuselage. Of course, it blows that part of the fuselage. You have to have it repaired, but it's supposed to lower the aircraft down at a safe enough speed to avoid having anybody seriously injured in the aircraft. And there are some pros and cons on that one. We'll talk about that later. All right, Cessna's fail-safe is if you lose everything, there's a handle between the two front seats that the pilot has to grab a hold and start pumping. And it's not just an easy pump. You're trying to pump pressure into the system so that the gear will retract or extend. Most of the time, you're more worried about it extending. If you can't retract it, you can still fly without problem and you can land without a problem. But if you can't extend it, then landing gets to be a real problem. So the fail-safe there is kind of a difficult process that while the pilot's trying to worry about where he's at or where she's at and what she's going to do with the aircraft itself, she's also got to worry about grabbing a hold of that handle and pumping away to get the gear down. One of the things we're going to test when we go out to the warehouse this afternoon, is we're going to test the stability of the aircraft. We're going to put one finger, underneath a wingtip of the Cessna, and we're going to push up and down. We're going to do exactly the same thing to the Piper that's sitting out there. One finger under the wingtip, and we're going to try to do the same comparison of pushing up and down. And I want you to note the stability of both of them. Now the Piper gear, because it's wider, has more stability on the ground. When you begin to look at flying magazines, the insurance company advertising will almost 99.5% show a Cessna upside down because strong winds on the ground, flipped it over. You'll never see an advertisement from any insurance company with a Piper upside down. It's almost impossible, except for the Piper Cub. The Piper Cub is a different story. But all other Pipers that compare with all other Cessnas, you can't flip a Piper aircraft upside down. But you can with gusty winds. If you're taxiing down a taxiway and you have a crosswind and it's pretty gusty that day, there's a real good chance that aircraft just gets flipped upside down. Okay, now we're going to talk about wings, high versus low. Okay, I'm sorry, you want to go back? Okay. Anybody want to take a 10-minute break? Okay, let's do it. It's a good time to go from summary of gear system into wings. Wings is the next topic, and then after that, we'll take a quick tour out in the warehouse of the aircraft. So you got 10 minutes, come back at 2:30. Hey, Jacob, would you turn that light on right there? Thank you.
Is it okay if I eat chips right now on the break?
Pardon?
Is it okay if I could go outside to eat chips?
You go outside to do what?
Eat chips.
You can eat in that hallway there, yeah. I don't want you wandering around outside, though. I'm responsible for you, so I have to keep an eye on you. So does anybody really need more time tomorrow, for example, to work on your essay? Or have you all completed your essay? Pardon? And I didn't give it back to you? I'll take a look and see. Did you give it to me, hand it to me? Email it? Okay. I'll check on that, Jesus. Francisco, what high school are you from? Parley, okay. We have anybody from Selma? 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 I'm going to be in the quad tonight at 6 o'clock. Mr. Johnson will be there as well. We're going to have a huge display, quite much larger than anything you've done in the computer lab. So if you come over there, a big screen, 2 big screen TVs, to be able to fly a 747. So if you're wandering around, you have nothing to do, and you want to come back to school at 6 o'clock and see our presentation, I guess it has something to do with Career Day. Is that what it is? Career Day, probably. So we'll be there from 6 to 7:30, and you can certainly stop by, and not only can you say hello, but if we're talking to people who haven't yet come into this program, you can tell them how fabulous the program is, right? Yes, right? Yes, sir. Right? Yes, sir.
Is it for extra credit if we go?
Pardon?
Is it extra credit if we go? He said, is it extra credit if we go?
What? The extra credit? Yeah, I'll give you credit. I'm not sure what the credit will be for. Maybe I'll have your name up there like it would have the credits. Okay, 2:30. Let's go forward here. Wings, high versus low. It is a really major difference in aviation. Sometimes it's major because of the mission for which the aircraft was designed, but also sometimes it's because one pilot is snooty about his aircraft compared to another pilot. They're getting all kinds of conversations about high wing versus low wing, people who love one versus the other. And there are advantages to both. High wings, for example, as you're flying along, you can actually look down with no obstructions, right? There's no wing down there below you. And that, for a lot of people, is important. I can think of pipeline patrol. I can think of mainly like California Highway Patrol. They patrol the interstate with fixed-wing aircraft. They also patrol it with helicopters, but they do a lot of patrolling with fixed-wing aircraft because they can patrol a longer path a lot faster than a helicopter. So there are certain reasons why the value of a high wing is being able to see directly down. Camping under the wing, that happens a lot. You want to go flying, you'll go camping. Sometimes people fly up into the mountains like in Idaho or northern Washington or Oregon or Wyoming, Montana. They do a lot of mountain flying. And when they land, a lot of people with high-wing airplanes camp under the wing. Now, can you do it in a low-wing airplane? Yes, but you're going to crawl underneath the wing, right? You can't stand underneath a low-wing airplane. So one of the advantages of a high-wing aircraft is being able to camp under the wing, or if it starts to rain, you're somewhere you can't get, like in Baja, if it starts to rain, you can't go find a house. You have to stand there and get wetter underneath your wing. Over obstacles along the side of the runway. This is important in Alaska, where if you're going to be landing on very narrow strips with a lot of rocks and brush and that sort of thing along the edge of the runway, you really want a high-wing airplane. Otherwise, you could probably never make it into that runway with a low-wing airplane. Now, they do fly low-wing airplanes up in Alaska, but the majority are high-wing by far. In fact, in one of the presentations that I made here maybe 2 weeks ago, I showed you pictures of bush planes with huge tires. They were all high-wing airplanes. And you're flying along, and usually you're not, I say more often than not, you're not flying under a cloud deck. You're flying out in the open where the sun is beating down on the airplane. It is definitely cooler and more comfortable in a high-wing airplane than it is a low-wing airplane, simply because a low-wing airplane, that sun beats down on top of the cabin into the side windows. But in a Cessna or any other high-wing airplane, you're blocked from the rays of the sun. Also, getting in and out. If you'll notice, Cessnas almost always have two doors on either side, and you can stand next to the Cessna, and with very little effort, you can literally almost step into the cockpit and sit down. It doesn't take much effort. So, for a lot of people who have limited mobility, they'd much rather go flying in a Cessna than they would a Piper. Most Piper aircraft, with the exception of the Piper Cub, you have to get up on the wing of the aircraft in order to get in the cabin, and usually there's only one cabin door, and it's on the right side. Another value is that fuel is gravity-fed from a high-wing aircraft. That doesn't eliminate the pump entirely, but it does eliminate the pump for most of the flight. The boost pump is when you were concerned about whether or not fuel was being fed properly from the tank, the gravity from the wing tanks down into the engine. Sometimes vapor starts getting into the line. It might be an extremely hot day, and you get some vapor lock, so maybe you'd want to turn on the boost pump to force fuel down through the lines instead of letting it develop vapor, letting it to get to the point where it can get so hot sometimes that the fuel in the lines turns into vapor instead of liquid. Okay, low wings. One of the advantages is the wings are closer to the runway. And I think we talked before about what is called ground effect. And ground effect has to do with the fact that as you cut lower and lower over the runway, you're sort of landing on a cushion of air that is being produced by the wing, sort of squeezing the air below it. So the performance of a low-wing aircraft in ground effect is decidedly better than the performance of a high-wing in ground effect, because the ground effect depends on the exact distance you are from the runway itself. And normally you measure that by saying that ground effect only works within one wingspan of the runway. But even so, you'd have to be under that 50% mark. So let's assume the wings of most light planes are around 36 feet. if you are higher than 18 feet, you're going to get a little bit of an advantage, but not much. So with a low-wing airplane, the wing is probably only about 3.5 feet off the ground. A Cessna, the wing is 6 feet plus. So they're not going to get an awful lot of value from ground effect on a high-wing airplane. And we talked about this before, just recently, when we said, what happens when you're in a high-wing airplane and you want to make a turn? In fact, in a low-wing airplane, the wing literally moves out of the way, and you have a perfect view of where you're going and whether or not there's conflicting traffic coming up on your left side. So if you're flying along, especially in the pattern around in an airport, you're going to be making left turns normally because traffic patterns usually have left turns. Once in a while they have right turns. But more often than not, the patterns around the airports in the United States are all left turns, in which case you would really like to have that wing get out of the way so you can see where you're turning and you can see whether or not there's any other aircraft conflict. Low wing allows landing gear to be installed under the wings. Now here is the basic issue between Cessna and Piper gear systems. This is the crucial issue. You've got to write that down in your notes. The major issue on gear systems between Piper and Cessna is that Piper was able to mount the gear on the main spar of the wing. Cessna had no choice, but they had to mount the gear on the fuselage. And then they had to extend it out from the fuselage. Well, there's only so much distance you can go out from a fuselage, so the gear on a Cessna is narrower than a gear on a Piper. And that makes a huge difference in stability. And stability on the ground is crucial, especially when you have strong, gusty crosswinds. Martine?
Piper was mounted on Piper mounted on
Piper what?
What was the landing gear on the Piper?
Where was the landing gear?
Yeah.
Underneath on the wings, on the main spar? Everybody get the answer to that? You're wondering where again on the wings of a Piper is the landing gear? It is attached to the spar, the wing spar. It's what gives it the ability to be very wide, and it gives it the ability to be very strong, and to be a very simple system. We're going to see it when we walk out to the warehouse. We're going to see the difference between high wing and low wing and the stability. And as I just mentioned a few minutes ago, you will see advertisements for aircraft being flipped over by strong gusty winds on the ground. You'll never see a Piper flipped over except if it's a hurricane or a tornado. But anything short of a 60-mile-an-hour wind is not going to move a Piper at all. But it will definitely endanger you if you're in a high-wing Cessna, or high-wing anything. One of the things that people don't really think about, and I have to remind them when I'm trying to sell Pipers against Cessna, is the fact that one of your crucial pre-flights is to visually determine how much fuel you have in the tank of the airplane, and then check that against what your fuel gauges say inside the airplane. Because too often, I hate to say this again, the Cessna gauges, the fuel gauges in Cessna are awful. They are literally awful. Piper has a much better reputation for accurate fuel gauges inside the cockpit to match what's actually in the tank. But as a pilot, and you're doing a pre-flight, after you've done the pre-flight of yourself, remember? Right? If you're doing a pre-flight of the airplane, you want to make sure that the fuel inside the tank, the quantity inside the tank is the same as is shown on the gauge. There are several things you're going to want to do. The second thing also is to make sure the color of the fuel is right. Because there have been situations, too many of them in the past, where a line guy fueled up an airplane with kerosene. Or he fueled up an airplane with a red-colored gasoline instead of green or blue. Green or blue is important for normal light planes. Red means it's an engine that only operates on 80, 87 octane. Matthew. What can we do?
No, what would you prefer? High wings or low?
Me? Oh, I sold Pipers. I much prefer low wings. I think overall, to me, the safest type of airplane is a low-wing airplane. Because I've seen too many guys literally lose control of a high-wing aircraft in windy conditions. We don't have that out here. When I talk about situations involving aircraft, I mean east of the Colorado River. The weather out here is so sweet and so gentle and so calm that you think that somehow or other when you go east of the Colorado River in a small airplane, you're going to find the same thing you find in the Central Valley? No, not at all. Okay, so the other thing is, it's important from the standpoint of both design and in terms of control, and that is the center of gravity is much lower in a low-wing aircraft. A high-wing aircraft has that huge wing up in the air, 6 feet in the air, and all that weight sitting up there on top of the fuselage. And again, it refers a lot to stability. Stability. Here are the traffic patterns in case you're not familiar with what a traffic pattern is. In the United States, Andrew? Yeah, sure. The important issues, remember, again, are why was Piper able to have a wider landing gear than Cessna? What was that reason? That is really important because if you're a designer of an aircraft, you would like to think that somehow or other you want a wide landing gear that's simple to operate, easy if something goes wrong, and provides more stability for the aircraft. But the Cessna people had no choice. They have to bring it out from the fuselage. And that by itself brings up a whole host of difficulties. Okay? Ready? As you can see, whenever you get into an airport, almost every aircraft that ever flies into an airport is going to do a left-hand pattern. If it's right-hand, the air chart, the sectional chart that I showed you some weeks ago, it'll show on there if there's a right pattern. But that's the only thing it'll show. If it doesn't show anything, you know automatically when you go into an airport, you assume that it's left pattern. That means left turns. All left turns. Left turn to base, left turn to final, left turn to crosswind, or base in this case, and left turn to final. So you can see that they are all left turns. If, for example, like Fresno and Chandler, you have the downtown area over here, we do left pattern for this runway, but then we do right pattern for this runway. Just to keep you away from flying over the center of the city. Because everybody makes patterns almost everybody makes patterns when they go into an airport. Okay, let's look at a summary here. So we have a few minutes left. We want to take a jaunt out and take a look at the aircraft. There is no perfect arrangement of wings and gear. And we just covered the fact that there are many reasons why you would like to have a high-wing aircraft and many reasons why you'd like to have a low. There are also reasons for retractable versus fixed gear. But I can tell you that if you have your choice and it fits your mission, don't get a retractable gear airplane. The maintenance cost is high and the insurance cost is high. Why is the insurance cost high? Because so many pilots land and they forget to put the gear down and they land on the belly of the aircraft and it causes tremendous damage, not the least of which, if the prop hits the runway and stops, it will cost $20,000 or $30,000 to take that engine, tear it apart, and magnaflux the crank to make sure there's no crack or no stresses in the crank of the engine. So if you have your choice and you fit your mission, no retractable. Here it again, the right aircraft should depend mostly on the mission for which it was purchased. It should. The operative word there is the word should depend. It doesn't always depend, but it should depend on the mission. The reason why you're buying that aircraft. And this is very true. Cessna learned this way before Piper learned it, and that is that they set up little training sites all over the country, thousands of them, and they provided them with the basic Cessna 150 or 152, which is a two-place training aircraft. And they realized that if you learned in a high-wing aircraft, and you learned it especially with Cessna, you probably would buy one when you became a pilot, when you got your license. If you were interested in buying an aircraft, more than likely you would gravitate toward the manufacturer of the aircraft in which you learned to fly. But today, if you're going to be looking at used aircraft all around the country, like I am for a friend of mine, it's going to depend largely on how many original models were built. For example, the 172 is probably a very easy airplane to buy today because there were so many made. I think there were 37,000 Cessna 172s made in the United States over that period of time. And so you can almost always find nearly exactly what you're looking for in a used Cessna 172. And again, like anything else, when the demand exceeds the supply, the prices go higher. So if everybody's looking for the same model of aircraft, they're going to pay more money for it. And again, some pilots, they just want any aircraft regardless of whether it may or may not fulfill the mission requirements. Even in Alaska, there are some people up there who like to have low-wing aircraft. Float planes. You would think that you'd want a high-wing aircraft for a float plane, right, for an amphibian? But there are plenty of low-wing float planes in Alaska. Just because people like to fly low-wing aircraft. And finally, the budget, the budget of the pilot compared to the price of the aircraft is going to have a lot to do with what he or she winds up buying. So if you ever decide you're going to start designing aircraft, keep in mind the mission of the aircraft, the stability, the ease of operation of the different systems, being able to check the fuel on the ground instead of using a stepladder. When you pull up to a fuel pump, you'll almost always see a stepladder there somewhere. It's because it's for the Cessna people who have to climb up on the stepladder and look over in the center of the wing and unloosen the fuel cap, stick their finger down in or try to look down in or put a piece of wood down in to determine how many gallons are down inside the wing. A Piper, you walk up to it, you open it up and look down in, close it. So those are some of the unsung advantages of a low wing versus high wing. Okay, that's the presentation. We've got a few minutes. I want you all to come out with me. Yes, hold on. Yes, I can, hold on. Don't forget, put your notes in order. If you've got them all, that's great. If you don't, fill them in. Go ahead. It's possible that someday, maybe 10 or 15 years from now, you will probably remember this lecture in one of your decisions to either you buy the airplane or your parents decide to buy one or your uncle buys one or your aunt buys one or someone that you know decides they're going to buy an airplane. You can talk to them about the differences between high wing, low wing, retractable versus fixed gear. If it was me, I would buy a low wing fixed gear airplane. The insurance is lower, maintenance is lower, stability is better, variety of reasons. Everybody okay now? Not yet? Okay. I want you all to follow me out there, and we're going to take a look at the wingtip of the Cessna that's here, the 210. Then we're going to go outside the door and look at the wingtip of the Piper that's sitting out there. I want each of you to take a turn with your thumb or your finger, trying to push the wing up and down of both the Cessna and the Piper. Okay? That's important. Martine? Can you what? Yeah. Everybody done with this? Okay. Good.